Lillian McFarland of Cardington, Ohio. And in fifth place, entry number 46, Hadley Wilson. Congratulations to your champion junior heifer of your junior belted Galloway show. Goes to entry number 33, Sunnybrook Lily, exhibited by Cora Barnard. Your reserve champion goes to entry number 34, Bama Belties Jody Joy, exhibited by Olivia Graham. Third and final call, Class 4, Prospect Steers. Third and final call, Class 4, Prospect Steers.
Another nice pair. I believe the young lady said these were November females, and a pretty logical place to start off in my mind. Young lady brings us one that's really highly presented, really highly shown. Very high quality individual to go ahead and start off the class. She's up-headed. I love the way she ties there from the point of her shoulder back into her forerib. This heifer is tremendously balanced as you study her from there back. I love the strength and the length she has to her top and to her hip. You study her underpinnings, and this is one that's incredibly deep-sided and does so by still maintaining some depth of heart and depth of flank. Really appreciate that about her. You step in behind her, and for all the look that she has through her front 1/3, she's still a heifer that's blessed with some pin width and just some general shape and muscularity. It's when we set her in motion, we might like to tweak her just ever so slightly. You can see it there on the stand, and she is an ultra-high tying female. With that, perhaps one that's rocked a little bit more forward in the angle to her knee, and we study her there off of her rear too when she goes, and she maybe struggles just a shot to get to her track when we set her in motion, but I think those are relatively small criticisms in this particular pair on a heifer that just takes it to another level in terms of her outline and in terms of her look. Heifer in second is one that's kind of neat to study because she is so opened up and so stout. One of the roundest and boldest ribbed heifers that we've seen here today. One that's blessed with a little bit of extra shape and turn, if you will, as you study her in terms of her muscle package. Ultra wide base female as well. For me, it's structure that sorts them, and we tweak that class winner just a little bit, and there's probably just a little more we'd like to change about this one. You study her in the angle to her shoulder, her knee, her front pastern. She needs relaxed in that regard. We'd like to see her take just a little more sure stride in terms of the angle to her hock and the cushion at her rear pastern, but one that is just undeniable in terms of her shape and her boldness and her muscularity. Young lady's done a nice job of getting her presented, and has undeniably got a nice breeding piece when she gets home.
And the winner of Class 120 on the Bell Galloway side goes to Casa Cattle Once Upon a Time, shown by Abigail Caron. Second place, Crooked Creek Iris, shown by Charlotte Albal. We are now ready to select Grand Champion Belted Galloway heifer.
Kind of what you expect when you judge a prospect steer show. I think these three on the top end of the class are really high quality, but all three of them are very, very different. But the one to me that needs to go to the top is Young Man's Gray Steer. Not only is he the stoutest, the most powerfully constructed, heaviest muscled one, but then he's also the most correct in his skeleton in the way he gets out and moves and he meets his track and he reaches and bends out of his front knee, and yet he's really cool up through his front end. I'll be the first to admit, if he's a little smaller frame for you, I get it, and I think that's the question for him. How much grow does he have in him? How big is he going to get? But today, he's the most fault-free, realizing what I'd like to change about the other two behind him. The two black steers in second and third are a little more similar in their type and kind. Both of them really long-bodied, well-presented, hairy calves that are big-footed and stout-boned. I like the Young Man steer to go second. To me, he's more correct in his shoulder and knee structure. He gets out and takes just a touch more flexible stride, especially in his hock and pasterns. And then you really study him. He's stronger out of his shoulder. They're over his rib and loin compared to the one in third. Now, where we'd like to change his calves in his hip, we'd like to level him from hooks to pins just a bit. When he travels away from you, for as big-topped as he is, I wish he had a touch more base width. That's a really nice functional kind of calf to go second. The one in third is the steer I like the best in terms of his frame and growth curve. He is a really good bodied calf that I mentioned is big-footed. You get on top of him, though, he gets a little weak there behind his shoulder. As you continue down his spine, he gets really high in his tail head. And then you get behind him of the top three. To me, he's the lightest muscled. You set him in motion, he's probably the tightest in his rear leg movement as well. That's being awful critical on a really nice steer to be standing in third. We got a good functional type of calf here in fourth in the darker red calf. He's good enough in his feet and legs and his skeleton. Unfortunately, today he's just too green. There's just not enough of him. But, man, that one's got some real upside to him. Just a beautiful calf that balances well from the side profile. The brockle-faced steer that comes in next, that young lady did a nice job of sticking with it, even though he got loose from her. Really good through his front 1/3. He's got nice meat animal shape to him, but he's one that's just a little frailer boned, a little shorter hipped when you set him in motion. The moderate calf coming sixth in the lineup, the black and white steer. I like his body. I think he's more functional in his structural makeup compared to the two behind him. Unfortunately, one of the lighter muscled calves in the class. The steer coming next, the black and white steer. I tell you, when he first came in, I thought, here's a really highly presented calf that's got some good to him, and he does, because he's got some look and balance from the side profile. But you set him in motion, you can see there leaving the ring. He just really worries me from a structural standpoint in his hip and hind leg, especially from a long-term perspective. And the steer that's going to round the class out, really up-headed, neat-fronted. That's a really good one to be standing on the opposite end of the class. Unfortunately, he's the lightest muscled steer in this particular class. And he, like the steer in front of him, he concerns me some structurally, just a little straighter up through his front end, but what a calf with a lot of presence through his front end. Congratulations to each of those exhibitors.
And the winner of Class 2 Prospect Steers, exhibitor 119, Braden McConnell from Richmond, Ohio. Second place, exhibitor 78, Kason Giardino from Hillsboro, Ohio. Third, exhibitor 30, Gwyneth Souter from Georgetown, Ohio. Fourth place, exhibitor 104, Rosalind Alball from Waterloo, Indiana. Fifth place, exhibitor number 10, Emmeline Cragen from Martinsville, Indiana. Sixth place, exhibitor 20, Mason McFarland from Cardington, Ohio. Seventh place, exhibitor 61, Tyler Bobo from Springfield, Ohio. Eighth place, exhibitor 76, Colton Kearns from Union, Kentucky. We're now ready for Class 3 Prospect Steers.
Well, folks, we get here to the end of our Belted Galloway show, and what an impressive drive out here on display for us. I think 5 heifers that start to really put together the parts and pieces that I like in females. You know, I think where we could in these particular classes, how we got cattle that were feminine and sound structured, still had some body and still had some substance to them. I think it's important that these show heifers look like show heifers, but at the end of the day, they got to go home and make cows. And, you know, I think each and every one of these out here, our class winners and our respective seconds, have a bright future in that regard. So my compliments to these exhibitors, and in that sense, good luck to you as you go forward and make mating decisions with these females. I've been very pleased with the exhibitors out here. The showmanship, the presentation is awesome. You get out here on the green chips, you know it's going to be, but really a heartfelt congratulations to you Belted Galloway exhibitors on the shape that these cattle came in out here. It's been a lot of fun sorting through them. There's certainly some differences out here in the lineup. You know, I respect everyone else's opinion, but today it's mine. I'll show you the order that I like. I'm a champion in reserve. I think there's one out here that kind of sticks out in my mind. Maybe gets a bit closer there for reserve after that. But with that, I'm going to set down the mic. I know it's been a long day. I know there's a lot of showing left to do, but let's show our appreciation to these kids for the job they've done. Give them a nice big round of applause.
Grand Champion Belted Galloway goes to exhibitor number 27, County Line Belties Lori, shown by Mark Snyder. Reserve champion Belted Galloway goes to exhibitor number 3, AJC California Dream, owned by Abigail Karen. Congratulations. That concludes our Belted Galloway Heifer Show. We're going to take a little break, and then there will be a Belted Galloway Steer Show.
I think this pair of black steers have to make their way to the top of the class because they're the ones that are just a touch more functional in their structural makeup compared to, in particular, to the ones in third and fourth. They're the ones that balance awful well. And then once you start studying this pair, the steer that's going to win the class to me, he's just bolder sprung. When you get on top of him, he's just a little further along today, just a little woofier. And then you go out of his hip, he's square from hooks to pins, and he just leaves you with more mass. And I, too, give him a slight advantage in terms of the way he handles his shoulder and knee, and then blends better down his spine. Now, I think he has that advantage because he is a touch shorter bodied. I like the steer in seconds, length of body better. I like how well the steer presents himself to his front 1/3, and I love his length of spine. He is a calf when you get on top of him, though, because he is so long spine. He does get a little weak behind his shoulder. He wants to get his tail head up just a bit and maybe not quite as true moving out of that front end. And then you get on top of him today, he gives up a little bit of that extra mass and width. But, you know, a year from now, I think that pair could definitely be switched, or 6 months from now or 8 months from now down the road as they have more feed. But today, I think they're just more product in the steer that's just a little better up through his shoulder and front end and the calf that wins. The black and white steer that comes third is really impressive in terms of his overall mass and width down his top and through his hip and quarter. Now, when he moves away from you, for as wide as he is up top and in his pins, he wants to travel pretty narrow at the ground. And he's one that just doesn't really blend together well for me. He's just a little piecey because he's really neat-necked and up-headed. And then he's big-backed and big-hipped. But when you set him in motion, he's got a little extra set to his hock and wants to get that hind leg up underneath him more than you'd prefer. But that's a really quality calf to be in third. The steer in fourth, no doubt, is more similar to the ones in first and second from a silhouette and presentation standpoint. Really neat up through his front end. This guy's got some meat animal shape to him as well. Unfortunately, the top four, he concerns me the most structurally off both ends of his skeleton. He's a little straighter up in his shoulder, a little too straight in his hock. I think a really functional calf to come here in fourth. I think you'd take a whole bunch of feeder calves that look like this, good bodied, good enough muscled, but just doesn't have that added show ring presence, that added foot and bone compared to those in the top end of the class. And almost the same exact thing can be said about the bald-faced calf here in sixth. Great body, great muscled. Unfortunately, he's just not as sound as the steer directly in front of him. That's why he went in sixth. The red steer coming in seventh, really a long-bodied, extended steer that's really youthful in his overall condition. I think he's got better days ahead of him. Unfortunately, he's one of the lighter muscled steers in the class, and he doesn't really ever sit down on that rear right pasture, and I'd like to change him there. Then the pair of shorthorn influence steers are going to round the class out. Both of them are good bodied. The one that comes in eighth just has an advantage, a muscle advantage over the one in ninth, but both of them go eighth and ninth for me because of their lack of structural integrity. Both of them are just a little off in their hip and their hind leg and the way they move about the ring. If we could change them there, no doubt that pair could move up. And the steer that rounds the class out, you know, not only is he a little straighter in his hock, but he's just the lightest muscled steer in this particular lineup.
And the winner of Class 3, Prospect Steers, goes to exhibitor number 8, Carter Boyd from Hillsboro, Ohio. Second place goes to exhibitor 13, Carson Oliver, Bellevue, Florida. Third place goes to exhibitor 52, Bowen Evers, Middlebrook, Virginia. Fourth place goes to exhibitor 62, Farrah Hedinger from Vevey, Indiana. Fifth place goes to exhibitor 27, Dalton Gibson from Summitville, Indiana. Sixth place, 105, Isabella Albal from Waterloo, Indiana. Seventh place, exhibitor 22, Allison Stamper from Cardington, Ohio. Eighth place, exhibitor 31, Adeline Riebling from Elkton, Michigan. Ninth place, exhibitor 21, Lauren McFarland from Cardington, Ohio. We're ready for class number 4.
really nice class that comes together pretty logically for me. This calf here hit the ring, and I thought this one's going to be tough to beat. He just got better the longer he was out here for me. This thing has so much presence up through his front end and his head and neck. I love the way his neck comes out of his shoulder, then he blends just awesome down his top line and out of his hip, and then you get on top of him. He's just so powerfully built, and you set him in motion. He's probably as sound as anything in here. Maybe the only thing that throws him off out here is the way his tail is today, his switch. But anyway, that's a really, really good calf that I like a great deal. I think the calf that follows him in terms of rib and volume and true substance, the one in second. I love this calf's rear rib and flank and his extra capacity and his rib cage. He is one that still has a great look from the side. You get on top of him, he's not as genuine as that steer that wins, and then you set him in motion. He's just not quite as flexible off his hind leg, but that's an awful good calf to be standing in second place. The black and white steer that came in third, he was the first one in the ring. I thought, this is a nice calf. He's super long-bodied, he's long-fronted, he's got some substance underneath him. Then you really start studying him compared to those in front of him. He's the flattest in his hip and through his lower quarter. You know, he's one that gets a little thicker in his neck, maybe not quite as attractive in his head and jaw as those in front of him, but I think a calf that's got a bright future to him because he's long-bodied, takes a good long stride, and I think he's got bright days ahead of him. The black and white steer that comes in fourth, one that you can't paint a longer, prettier neck on, but unfortunately that added length and extension and attractiveness just gets him a little flatter jawed, and it takes away from his stoutness when you study him from there back, just not near the capacity of those steers in front of him. I hope he can get that with the frame he has, but man, I appreciate his feet and leg structure, his length and extension. You get more power in him, more substance in him, young lady, that's going to be a good one. The young man that comes in fifth is one that probably is a little bigger bodied and stouter boned. I like his frame better compared to the one in front of him. Unfortunately, when you set him in motion, he's just too short strided off that hind leg for me, a little straighter up in his shoulder. That's why he's got to go in the 5 hole out of a nice top 5 steers in this particular class. Young man's calf coming next, the socket-legged steer. A great bodied calf, a lot of depth, a rib in this sucker. Unfortunately, he just doesn't balance the best. He doesn't have the added eye appeal and attractiveness we're looking for in these prospect steers this evening. The black steer that comes next, moderate, really heavy muscled. If you like muscle, you'll appreciate this calf. Unfortunately, just need a little more structural correctness to go along with it, need a little more eye appeal. Then the steer that comes next, I believe 8th place in class, a lot of length and extension in this guy, just need more muscle to go along with that length, and the calf that's going to round the class out, a nice bodied calf that ought to be a real efficient feeder for the young men. Man, he just concerns me the most from a structural standpoint in this particular class. Congratulations to those exhibitors. Really nice calf on the top end of that class.
Back over here in our Belted Galloway show, we've got our single entry and champion prospect steer out here, and folks, this one's pretty nice. He could stand a load of competition, a calf that you got a lot of things about, one that's got a fresh and youthful look as you study him in the shape to his head and his neck. From there back, one that's really impressive in terms of his shape. I like his edges coming out of the backside of his shoulder, big loin, big hip kind of a calf, one that's got some added bone and foot size to him. He's not the deepest flanked one, you've ever seen, but that calf's got a lot of days on feed in front of him. Young lady's doing a good job of managing a steer that I think has had enough today. I think he's ready to go to the tie-outs, but she's getting every ounce of it out of him out here. Congratulations to her. This is our champion prospect. Let's show him a nice round of applause.
And champion feeder steer on the Belted Galloway side goes to entry number 2, Sunnybrook Ernie, owned by Meredith McBride. Congratulations. We're ready for class 128, finished steers on the Belted Galloway side. Placings for class 4 on the feeder, on the prospect steer side. Entry or exhibitor number 1, or place number 1 goes to exhibitor number 12, Matthew Cox from Franklin, Ohio. Second place goes to exhibitor 51, Maddie Evers from Middlebrook, Virginia. Third place goes to exhibitor 24, Liberty Glazer from Waynesfield, Ohio. Fourth place goes to exhibitor 107, Emily Hauer from Big Prairie, Ohio. Fifth place goes to exhibitor 59, Peyton McAllister from Bethel, Ohio. Sixth place goes to exhibitor number 1, Caden Gardner from West Alexandria, Ohio. Seventh place goes to exhibitor 26, Kaylee Glazer from Waynesfield, Ohio. 8th place goes to exhibitor 28, Kaylee Eckelman from Seymour, Indiana. And 9th place goes to exhibitor 100, Weston Hoddenscheid from Kenton, Ohio. We're now showing class 5 on the prospect steer side.
This is your only class, so I guess you're champion and reserve in your market steers here in your purebred show. A young man's calf that's going to go ahead and win the class. He's a little bit different color out here, and I think he's just a little bit different kind, and that's what kind of propels him to the top spot. He's the combination calf, in my estimation, one that still gives you a show steer look as you study him through his front 1/3. He's choke-necked. He's a calf from there back that's strong in terms of his top line. You get your hands on him, you appreciate his degree of finish. He's one that handles with enough condition to get up there in grade choice, one that's a big-bodied calf. And I think where he separates himself is when you step in behind the cattle. This one's just simply got more muscle, more width, more base width. You study him at his chest floor, you study him going away from you. I think there's just a little bit more substance there, and one that sure paints you a show steer picture from the side profile. Calf coming in second, I think, follows most closely in terms of type and kind. He maybe takes it up a notch even further in terms of his look through his front third, high-headed kind of a calf. He probably edges our class winner just a shot in that regard. Big boned and big footed calf. I love that about him. He may be as massive as any in this particular group in that regard. It's when you step in behind him, you might like to change him just a touch. He's a calf that closes up a little bit in terms of his base. Not as impressive and square in terms of his muscle shape right out of the back side of his shoulder. Study him in terms of his pin width and his hip, and you'd like to just intensify him just a touch. But he's a wild looking one that the young lady's done a great job of getting shown and presented out here. Calf coming around next actually probably does offer just a touch more shape. You get right up on him and in behind him, maybe just handles with a little bit more depth there to his loin edge, maybe just a little stouter at the center portions of his rear quarter. For me, this one's maybe not quite as amped up in terms of his show steer look, a little lower fronted, a little plainer at his jowl and his chest floor. Like to stouten this one up just a touch in terms of his bone. Drop him just a shot there in terms of his flank, but a quality kind of meat and potatoes calf here going third. Round out the class, a young man, he brought us a big frame, long-bodied kind of a steer, one that's got a lot of length, the spine, and a lot of bone and foot underneath this guy. For me, we need to adjust him structurally, one that comes just a little steeper there in the angle to his shoulder and his knee, and it's when you step in behind him, he's as closed up as any in terms of his twist, in terms of his shape there through his rear quarter. If he's going to be the bigger frame calf, we'd just like to see a little bit more genuine substance and shape to that one going away. But a really, really nice drive of purebred steers. Let's give him a nice round of applause.
And the winner of Class 128 finished steer on the Belted Galloway side goes to Gypsy's Cowabunga, owned by Tanner Dwyer. Second place goes to Sunnybrook Denozo, owner Charlotte Alball. Third place goes to Sunnybrook Maestro, owned by Haley Hillhouse. Fourth place, Moon Shadow Thor, owned by Tommy McGuire. We're now ready to pick the champion purebred steer and reserve.
Hey, this is an awesome class to judge. There are a lot of differences in these cattle, and I think second through fifth and sixth is really close in a lot of differences, but this black steer, I think, needs to win because he's the one steer out here that's got muscle and power, even though he's not the heaviest muscled or the most powerful. He's got more than enough. He's the one that balances well, and there's plenty that balance, but he's the only one that combines it with structural correctness. He's just the complete package for me. It's hard to pick a big hole in this guy. Does he have all the superlatives? No, not at all, except he is the most complete and yet still has some wow factor. I like this calf to win, and his structure does it for him. The calf that comes in next, the orange calf that comes second, if this one can move better off his hind leg, he wins for me. This one is way up-headed and cool-headed and cool-necked. He's big-backed. He's powerful. He's muscular. I don't know if he didn't take the trip well, but this guy's just having a little harder time getting around the ring. He wants to hammer his hind leg ever so slightly. He does have a lot of the superlatives and the wow factor, but we need the structure to go with it for me to move him up into that one hole. The steer that comes in third, he hit me hard when he came in because he is so sound-structured. He's good-bodied. He's attractive from the side profile, but where we'd like to change him is pretty obvious on the cattle on either side of him. He's not near as big-footed. He's not near as stout-boned. Is he not near as heavy muscled as some on either side of him either? I called him good enough in his muscle, but I need more substance of bone to go underneath that skeleton to move him up any higher. But I love his eye appeal. I love his balance. I like his structural correctness, and that's why I considered him put in second. The black and white steer that comes fourth, what a great-bodied, What a big back, big hip type steer. What concerns me with him are two main things. One, he's the most mature about his head. I would assume he would be about the oldest of anything out here. And then he's just a little straighter in the angle to his hock. At times I want to move him up into that 2-hole because he does have some superlatives in this class. But when we set him in motion, he just gets a little hammer-legged. And then you look at his head, he's just a little too mature there compared to 3 younger, fresher-looking cattle on the top end of the class. The young lady steer that comes fourth, here's a good-bodied one as well. Steer that's got some length of side. He's attractive enough up through his front end. When you really get to study him, though, he's a little counterfeit in his muscle because he gets a little too narrow underneath his skeleton for me. And then you set him in motion. He's got a lot of set to that rear hock, both from behind and the side, just not true enough moving off his hind two when he does go around the ring. The red steer, there's some wow factor in this guy. What a clean-necked, up-headed calf. The biggest back, the biggest ended steer in this class, there's no doubt about it. But those top 6, he easily concerns me the most from a structural standpoint. Got both ends of his skeleton. I placed him in that hole when he was set in motion. As you see him leave the ring there, he's kicking up a lot of chips. We just need him to be more correct in his skeleton for me to move him up any higher. Then we get into a trio of steers here in the bottom end of the class that ran into a real buzzsaw here. There's classes we judged earlier. They'd be way up the line from here. The gray calf, I tell you, this calf's got a lot of good in him and a bright future young man. Today, he just lacked the wow factor, that added power and stoutness of those on the top end to move up. But don't give up on that calf. He's got a bright future to him. The black and white steer coming next, another well-presented one that's got a really cool head and neck and some attractiveness and presence to him. Unfortunately, he's one of the lighter muscled steers that wants to get his hind leg up underneath him when you set him in motion. Then the calf that rounds the class off, another long-spined, long-necked calf, unfortunately, just the lightest muscled steer. That lacks the structural integrity I'm looking for today. But let's put our hands together for an extremely high-quality class on the top end.
Back over here in our Bell to Galloway show, 2 steers already champions in their own right, out here showing our prospect against our finished steer. And, you know, I think there's subtle differences in the cattle, but you step off to the side of them, and I think they're probably more alike than they are different. One's at a little bit different point in his life, obviously, but 2 show steers out here that have look, they have body, they have muscularity, they've got some substance in terms of their structure, and they're still able to get out and go. And so for me, very pleased with this pair of cattle. Again, one's there at his, nearing his finish point. The other one's got a long life there ahead of him to get there, maybe with some question marks in that regard. And for that reason, I'm going to use the young man's brown steer here to win, pull this other guy in for contention. But let's give him a nice round of applause on 2 really high-quality individuals.
And Grand Champion steer goes to entry 59, Gypsy's Cowabunga, owner Tanner Dwyer. Reserve goes to entry number 2, Sunnybrook Ernie, exhibited by Meredith McBride. Congratulations. Placings in Class 5, Prospect Steer class. First place goes to exhibitor 98, Kason Halls from St. Joseph, Illinois. Second place goes to exhibitor 115, Paisley Wisniewski, Elk City, Oklahoma. Third place goes to exhibitor 120, Kayla Lippert from Sinclairville, New York. Fourth place goes to exhibitor 17, Colby Hoffman from Richwood, Ohio. Fifth place goes to exhibitor 50, Carter Evers from Middlebrook, Virginia. Sixth place goes to exhibitor 75, Braden Cummings from Hillsboro, Ohio. Seventh place goes to exhibitor 96, Mark Henzel from Perry, Michigan. Eighth place goes to exhibitor 25, Lincoln Glazer from Waynesfield, Ohio. Ninth place goes to exhibitor 40, Norman Tucholsky from Trafalgar, Indiana. We're now showing Class 6, Prospect steers. On the Bella Galloway side, we are showing percentage steers, club calf steers. We have
Pair of composite prospect steers out here back on your Belted Galloway side, and you know, two steers that are very, very different in terms of their type and kind, and I think it's actually pretty close in terms of their general quality. Young lady steer here that's going to make a hard turn and exit the ring, I think just offers us a little bit more look and eye appeal, a little bit more comfortable with this calf in terms of his growth curve, maybe the wildest necked, coolest fronted steer that we've seen here today. I love the way he picks his head and neck up out of the top side of his shoulder, long spine steer that's got some added substance in terms of his foot and bone. He maybe doesn't blow you away in terms of his muscularity or in terms of his hip shape, but I think he's got enough on him, and I could see that calf on down the road when he gets fat, offering us just a little bit more look and a little bit more show ring eye appeal, if you will. Steer here in second. There's a lot of good to say about this calf. I think he is a little bit safer in terms of the angle to his shoulder and his knee. Love him in terms of his body. He is a little more balanced up in that regard. I like him there at his center. Tremendously deep flank steer here for this stage of the game. I'm just trying to wrap my head around his growth curve just a little bit. He's a shorter face, shorter cannon kind of a steer, a little bit lower to the ground, if you will. It's when you step in behind him, he doesn't really offer us any more muscle than the calf that goes before him, and he's one that does so in a little shorter statured kind of a package. But nice pair of steers, certainly some give and take. Time will be the ultimate judge, but my compliments to each of those exhibitors on two really intriguing show steers.
And the winner, Class 131 Club Calf Steer on the Belted Galloway side, goes to Rock Creek Sheriff Bart, owned by Jeffrey, Ellen, and Alexa Adler. Second place, HMD Buffalo, owned by Henry Dwyer. We're now ready for Class 132 feeder steer on the Belted Galloway side.
A young lady brings us a single entry steer out here. another club calf or crossbred composite breed, if you will. One that's really a meat and potatoes kind of a steer here. And no, he doesn't blow you away in any one facet, but a calf that's incredibly balanced. You get into the center of this steer and study his body depth and his proportions and his balance. I really like that about him. You step in behind him, he's a calf that's got enough muscle on him, reads with some width there to his chest floor, set him in motion. I think he's very adequate in terms of his structure out here. You know, being so basic and so complete, he's one that we can amp up just a little bit in his look through his front 1/3, perhaps a calf that ties a bit lower, a bit more pronounced about his crest, and one maybe that's not quite as impressive in terms of his pin set or his hip, but just one that's got a lot of neat meat animal pieces to him. Young lady's doing a really good job.
Winner of Class 132 feeder steer, entry 79, River Smith Ricky Bobby, owned by Josh Smith, Abigail Gant, and Isabella.
Another nice class, but I think these two steers surface to the top pretty logically for me, even though they're really different in their type and kind, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's structure that's going to let the black and white calf win. He's just built better in his shoulder. He's smoother in his shoulder. He's better in his angle. From the point of it to the top of his shoulder, the point of his shoulder, and then you go to the ground. He just got a little more setback in his knee and a little more bend when he moves. I guess my decision with him is there enough to him today? Because that black steer is a powerhouse, and to me there is, and I think it'll continue to come because he moves at his base as wide as he is in his pins, and I really like that about him. He's just awesome to look at from the silhouette standpoint. He wins from a balance and structure standpoint. No doubt the black steer is a powerhouse. I love him down his back and out of his hip and his stifle and his width from behind. He's big-footed and stout-boned, and I appreciate how well he handles his hip and hind leg for as powerful as he is. But he is big and open in his shoulder, and that's what comes with the amount of rib and volume and muscle he has from there back. He wants to splay out on his front end ever so slightly for a young calf, and then he's just not acting the best. And the young lady's done a really good job getting him shown for as bad as he's acted and not wanting to lead. Young ladies, sometimes it's worse when they're a little stubborn than when they're running, and he's not helping you at all today. But you've got all out of him you can. So congratulations, a really nice pair on the top end. The yellow calf that comes next, when he's standing still, y'all in the audience are probably like, man, that calf contends to win, and I agree with you 100%. I love this calf from the side, his added chub, his added rib and volume. I love his head and his neck. It's not just super choke-fronted, but it fits him so well, and it's just an awesome balance. Not only for a prospect steer, but also as a fat steer. His feet and legs are good on the ground, but when you set him in motion, he wants to get really narrow at his base. If you get behind him, he's almost built like a boat. He's tight in his shoulder, he's wide back, then he gets really narrow in his pins in relation to the width in the middle of his back. We change him there and just wide him at his base. This class gets even tougher for me. The black and white steer that comes in fourth, I think one that has a very bright future. Young man, this steer is the greenest of any of them in the top four. And when you get on top of your calf, you can tell that today. He's skinny, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not the best thing for today, but for long term, it's going to work out. This calf gets around and moves fairly well. When you really study him, though, he's the narrowest in his forerib, the narrowest down his back, just the lightest muscled steer of these top four, and I just didn't think there was enough of him to move him any higher today, but appreciate a lot of things about this calf. Then we get into a lot of different flavors and types and shapes in these calves in the bottom five of this class. The black and white steer coming next of the bottom five, I think, has the most presence to him, the most stoutness, genuine stoutness and muscle to him combined with some look, but unfortunately, he's just a little shallower flanked, a little high in his tail head. Just not near the mass of those top end or the presence. The orange and white calf coming next, super long bodied and extended. I love that about him. Great hair coat on that guy too. We just need more rib and volume and true base width to go along with that frame. The young lady's black steer coming next, very moderate calf that is awesome bodied and bold ribbed. Unfortunately, he concerns me about as much as any of them in terms of his structural makeup in his hip and hind leg. Young man in the cowboy hat, super long-bodied steer that's just a little harder in his general body type than the blue roan calf that rounds the class out. Man, he is big bone. Unfortunately, he's just the poor structured steer in this particular lineup.
Back here in our Bell to Galloway show, our composite market steers out here in contention. Two individuals that are sure different enough in terms of their type and kind. And I'll be honest, young man steer here that's going to go ahead and wins does so because I think there's just more calf there. You get up on top of him, you step in behind him. This calf offers us just a little more genuine shape. There's a little more squareness right in behind his blades. A calf that comes with just a little bit more quarter and lower stifle to him. Undeniably bigger boned and footed. I like the body that this calf brings to the table. You know, he's undeniably one it's got a better coat of hair, but I think it's when you look underneath that hair, you realize this calf is just gauged wider from end to end, and I think that's what splits the pair in my mind. Because the young lady's calf here in second's got some nice things about him. He might be just a touch safer in terms of her structure. One that picks his head and neck up taller out of the top side of his shoulder. I love his balance underneath. He's a calf that's super parallel in terms of his lines. Just not as big in his body, not as impressive in his meat animal shape as you step up on top of and in behind the cattle. A pretty steer that cuts a nice silhouette. A nice pair of cattle out here. Young man just brings us more calf here to win the class.
And the winner of Class 133 finished steer on the Bell to Galloway side goes to entry number 51. Royal Family Belties Corn Dog, owned by Tommy McGuire. Second place goes to Common Ranch Duncan, owner Kaylee Campbell. We're now ready to choose the champion percentage steer and reserve champion. The placings on Class 6 prospect steers. First place goes to entry 53, Ruby Perkins from Amity, Pennsylvania. Second place, exhibitor 88, Victoria Heifer, Buxiers, Ohio. Third goes to exhibitor 42, Bryn Kinzel from Epworth, Iowa. Fourth place goes to exhibitor 112, Austin Southerly from New Carlisle, Ohio. Fifth place, exhibitor 49, Clint Wilt from Bloomingburg, Ohio. Sixth place, exhibitor 110, Wyatt Wolfer from Williamsburg, Ohio. Seventh place, exhibitor 33, Stacy Arthur from Bethel, Ohio. Eighth place, exhibitor 94, Colton Kearns from Union, Kentucky. Ninth place goes to exhibitor number 7, Caleb Turner, New Knoxville, Ohio. Class 7 is in the ring. Class 8 and 9 need to be in the makeup ring. Again, Class 8 and 9 prospect steers need to be in the makeup ring.
A nice drive out here in our Club Calf Steer Show here back in the Belted Galloway ring. Three steers out here in contention, certainly at different points in their life, and you got to weigh and measure that just a little bit. Young ladies, prospect steer here out of the first class, one that offered us just a few extras in terms of his look and his eye appeal. His neck attachment is very much on point. I like this thing in terms of his lines, in terms of the added bone and foot size that he brings to the table. Maybe as edgy as any in terms of his muscle pattern. We talked in class and in division, I guess, if you will, maybe not the deepest flanked one we've seen all day, and perhaps a calf that has just a little risk built into his structure in terms of his added sharpness, a hock, and perhaps just being a bit straighter there in the angle to his shoulder and his knee. But I like the look, the eye appeal, the show ring presence that one brings to the table. Completely different type and kind of steer here. I believe this calf's name's Ricky Bobby. As he shakes and bakes stakes around here on the turn. A calf that you like in terms of just his general build, a safer structured kind of a steer, one that's got enough depth there to his center body and rib cage. He's not as impressive in terms of his roundness to his rib, maybe not quite as good right there at his mid rib and in his fore rib. A steer that's maybe less impressive in terms of his look and his eye appeal as you study him at his throat and at his crest. But a calf that's got some neat things about him. Big burly, big bone, big footed calf here coming next. One that's really big bodied. A calf that's sure acceptable in terms of his muscle package for this weight and this level of maturity out here. Not the tallest fronted one we've seen all day. A calf that we'd like to change in that regard. One that we might balance up just a shot better underneath the hair as you study him back into his flank. But a chubby, burly kind of a fat steer that's just at a different point in terms of his maturity. I'm going to step off the cattle, give him one more look. It certainly is close. Let's congratulate these exhibitors with a nice round of applause.
Champion percentage steer comes out of class 131. Entry exhibitor number 22, Rockcastle Sheriff Bart, owned by Jeffrey Ellen and Alexa Adler. Reserve champion goes to exhibitor number 51, Rye Family Abeltes Corn Dog, owned by Tommy McGuire. Congratulations. We're now showing class 136, late spring heifer calf, purebred, mismarked heifers.
Definitely one of the more challenging classes to put together, a lot of different kinds out here. But I think the gray steers had the surface to the top because they're the ones that are more correct in their structural makeup and combine it with enough muscle and balance to be acceptable. The steer that wins, no doubt, is as stout and powerful as any of them made. That's his clear advantage over the one in second. You set him in motion. He's good enough moving for me to go ahead and win the class with his clear superlatives in terms of balance and muscle. The calf in second, I really like him in motion. I think he moves about as good as any of them. When she gets him stuck right there, he can compete with any of them from the side profile. But you move in behind this guy, and you realize he gives up a lot of dimension to all the top 5 or 6 steers. I'm going to call him acceptable today, and I think he's going to continue to get more powerful because he has good shape. But today we just need a little more of him to move him up any higher, but a real practical, good steer to be second. The black steer that comes in third is as good bodied as any of them, and I'm talking about depth and shape when you get on top of him, both dimensions. But he's one, when you do set him in motion, he gets a little frailer in his bone work. He doesn't handle his hind leg quite as fluid and as smooth as those two directly in front of him. The young man saw other solid black calf in the top 4 coming in fourth. Here's a calf that you love his meat animal shape and his genuine power and expression. That's why he stayed out here longer and in contention than I usually would have today, because he does concern me structurally, and the shape and angle of his hock off his hind leg, he hammers him the most of the top 5 or 6 animals in this particular class. The black and white steer coming next, Love his head and neck, how up-headed he is, how extended he is to his front end. He's good in terms of his center rib depth, but of course he gets a little high in his flank there. You get in behind him, he just gets a little piecey in his overall muscle system, doesn't have that added expression, especially down through his lower quarter. The bald-faced steer coming in 6th, another one that's really moderate and good-bodied, but he concerns me structurally probably the most of those 3 that came in the middle part of the class. He wants to kind of get out in his hock, not move with the flexibility and trueness I'm looking for this evening in a prospect steer. But in terms of meat and potatoes and functionality of a good potential market steer in terms of finish, muscle, and efficiency, he checks all those boxes for me. The young lady coming next with the shorthorn steer, I love her intensity. She came here to win today, and she's got a calf that she gets presented well. He's awesome from the side profile. He's big-footed, he's stout-boned, but you move in behind him, and he's arguably the lightest muscled steer in the class. But I thought he still had enough balance and look and integrity in his movement to go ahead and move him up a couple of spots. The shorthorn steer coming next is definitely better bodied and thicker ended than the shorthorn calf directly in front of him. He just gets really rigid in his movement off of his hind wheels. And the pair of steers that round the class out are our poor structured steers in this particular class. They're really similar in the way they're made. They're good in their muscle, but they're the most restrictive in their movement. The young lady's calf that's going to come in 9th, he's just got more rib and volume than the steer that rounds the class out.
A young lady brings us a really high-quality single entry here. I joked with the young lady, I think this heifer is ready to go to tie-outs, and I know it's getting late in the day, but I think it's certainly worth bringing this one out here. I think this Miss Mark deal is kind of cool. We can still exhibit these cattle and kind of see what the breed has to offer, even when it's outside of the color pattern that meets your registration requirements. But I like this heifer an awful lot. One that's got so many good pieces in terms of her neck attachment. Love this one's looseness. Her structure is beautiful out here. She's got the correct set at her hock and her rear pastern. Sits down on a big foot, has a big bone underneath her. A female that I think sure acceptable in terms of her structure as you study her from hooks to pins. You know, she's a young green little heifer out here. Underneath the hair, you might like to balance her up just a touch better back into her flank, but some of that's to be expected at this stage of maturity. Young lady's doing an awful good job with an awfully high quality heifer.
And winner of Class 136, exhibitor number 1, Sunnybrook Zoe, owned by Cora Barnard, an automatic division champion. Placings in Class 7 prospect steers. First place goes to exhibitor 63, Kelsey Clark from Bluffton, Indiana. Second place goes to exhibitor 37, Maya Bauman from Holland, Michigan. Third place, exhibitor 111, Annabella Johnson from West Alexandria, Ohio. Fourth place goes to exhibitor 82, Caden McGuffey from St. Paris, Ohio. Fifth place goes to exhibitor 71, Olivia Wood from Long Bottom, Ohio. Sixth place, exhibitor 29, Caitlin Holbrook, Aaron, Oklahoma. Seventh place, exhibitor 109, Annie Jane Johnson, West Alexandria, Ohio. Eighth place, exhibitor number 3, Cheyenne Baker, West Alexandria, Ohio. Ninth place, exhibitor 14, Hannah Sullivan, Milford Center, Ohio. And 10th place, exhibitor number 4, Grant Robertson from Peebles, Ohio. We're now showing Class 8 prospect steers. Class 9 needs to be in the makeup ring.
A young lady brings us another single entry out here, a heifer that just barely missed her markings, and one that I think is just still so high quality. I love her look, high-headed female that's really bold-ribbed and big-bodied from there back, loose-made in terms of her structure. I like the angle to her knee. Female from the side that's very appropriate in terms of angle to her hock and her rear pastern. Step in behind her, and that's where you might change her just a hair structurally. She wants to twist those hocks in just a touch. We'd like to square her up in that regard, but a female that's got a lot of volume, a lot of balance from the side profile. Going to be a really neat project for the young lady when she gets her in production.
Winner of Class 138 Senior Heifer Calf goes to Exhibitor 22, Rock City Lily Von Stump, owned by Jeffrey, Allen, and Alexa Adler. We're now getting ready to choose the Grand Champion, a mismarked heifer. Class 9 and 10 prospect steers need to be in the makeup ring.
Well, a pair of high-quality heifers out here in contention for your Miss March show. Not huge numbers, but my compliments to each of these young ladies. I like both of these heifers a great deal in terms of their structure, in terms of their body, in terms of the feminine character that they bring to the table here at this juncture. I think it's minor differences between them, and frankly, it's a bit of a personal preference call. Heifer here out of our first class, a predominantly black heifer, is one that's got a lot of neat pieces in terms of her foot and her bone, her power and her shape up high. A female that, in spite of just a little bit of throat, is still high tying and got a neat look up front. Underneath the hair coat, we talked in class, you might want to balance her up just a touch better from her navel back into her flank, but one that I like a great deal in terms of her quality and just the big pieces that she brings to the table. A lot of similar things can be said for the heifer here coming out of our second class, one that's incredibly maternal. I like this one in terms of her balance, balance. Her body and the sweep she has there to her rib cage is impeccable. Female that I think is very, very good in terms of the angle to her shoulder and her knee. Got the appropriate give there at her hock and her rear pastern. As we just talked, perhaps one that draws those hocks in just a shot going away from you. Maybe not the biggest and boldest in terms of her twist or her lower quarter also, but one that looks like a female and looks like a cow out here. I think it's close. I'm going to put the mic down, give them one more look. Let's compliment each of these young ladies with a nice round of applause.
So champion Miss Mark Heifer, entry number 22, Rock City Lily Von Stump, owned by Jeffrey Ellen and Alexa Adler. Reserve goes to entry number 1, Sunnybrook Zoe, owned by Cara Bernard. We are now showing class 142, late spring percentage heifer calves on Belted Galloway side.
A nice way to start off our percent show here in the heifers. A heifer that I think puts together so many good pieces in terms of look and power and balance. A female that's big-backed and thick-ended. She comes to us with just a little bit more shape as you study her there in terms of her rear quarter. Athletic in the way she handles her rear, too. For me, if we're going to change this heifer just ever so slightly, we'd start by just dragging that tail head down into her hip a little more neatly. But that's being really critical on one that I think is fresh and balanced and feminine. Brings a lot of nice pieces to the table out here in this single entry class.
And the winner of that class is exhibitor number 10, Cosper Artemis, owned by Paisley Garmin.
By far the deepest and best class of the day, and these two black steers surface to the top for me. They are just so powerfully built, so big-footed, so heavy structured. And then they got balance and eye appeal and structural integrity to go around, would go with it. This is just a really, really good pair. But when you really get to breaking this pair down, the young man steer to me just has to win. He is so unique in the way he's built and the way his neck comes out of his shoulder. The thing looks like a cobra. Then you go from there back, and he's so level-topped and level-hipped. And then, you know, what really sorts it for me is two things. One, he is just huge-ribbed and huge-bellied and has an advantage there. And then you see these two move away from you. They're both got enough muscle, but this guy goes to the ground with the same width at his hocks that he has as his pins. I think this is an awesome class, and that's a really good calf to win. The calf that comes in second, I love him in so many ways. He's probably got an advantage in terms of length of body compared to that steer directly in front of him. I really like his freshness and how youthful he is up through his front 1/3. I mean, this one is going to be ready to go down the road. He's not one that's going to look old at his end point. He's going to grow right, in my opinion. This is a really high-quality calf, and as I said, it just comes down to some subtle differences. Maybe he doesn't have the extra slope to his belly compared to that one in front of him. Maybe he doesn't have quite the base width today, but I do think he will get it. That's a close pair and a really high-quality set of cattle. This white calf, I fell in love with him when he walked in, and there's almost all the classes today. This guy might have won, but in terms of structural integrity, in terms of balance and eye appeal, you just ran into two buzzsaws that are just as good as this calf in that area, but this calf's basically impeccable in both those areas. You get on top of him, He's not near as massive as the two in front of him today, but I think he's correct in his muscle for his weight and his age and his frame. I think this one's only going to continue to get better. You just ran into a credible pair, young man. That's a good calf. The calf that comes in fourth, at times I had him in third, the white underlying calf. Here's another one. Great balanced, highly presented, good structured. I guess what sorts him down to four for me, young lady, today, when you get right behind him, he's not quite as square from hooks to pins, doesn't progressively thicken from hooks to pins like that white calf in front of him, but four outstanding calves on the top end of that class. And the same can be said in terms of quality for the calf in five. Another great body, good muscled steer. I guess he goes down to five for me compared to our top end. He's the poorest balanced. He's the frailest footed of the top five. He gets a little thicker in his neck, then you really study his bone structure. You know, he's big in his hocks, and then he kind of progressively narrows as he goes and gets smaller as he goes to the ground. I wish we could change him in both those areas. The black and white steer that comes in sixth, another great calf to be standing this far down the lineup. Tons of rib and volume, tons of muscle, and probably as heavy muscle as anything in here. Unfortunately, of the top six calves, he's the most mature through his front end, the least youthful in his look. I wonder how much grow and go he's got left in him. And then when you set him in motion, not quite as fluid as those calves directly in front of him. Another really sound structured, loose spine steer here in seventh. Unfortunately, when you get on top of him, he's the most pinched in his forerib, the just most uncoordinated in his overall balance and look. He just doesn't blend as well, but he's super flexible in his general appearance and his movement. The young lady's black steer coming next. Another one, great one to be standing towards the bottom end of the class. Great rib, bold sprung. Unfortunately, just gets a little too straight up in the shoulder, maybe just not quite the genuine power and balance of those in front of her. And then the pair of steers are going to round the class out, had to go down for me just because they're not quite correct enough in their general skeletal makeup and their structure. Worry about them a little bit from a longevity standpoint, but both of those calves acceptable in terms of their rib and volume, acceptable in terms of their muscle, but a really outstanding pair of calves on the top end of this class. Please put your hands together for those exhibitors.
A neat duo of cattle out here as we progress through your crossbred heifer show. That said, I think a commanding place to start. A young lady brings us one that sure is fun to evaluate. It starts in her front 1/3, a heifer that's so feminine about the shape to her face, very ladylike in terms of her neck and her shoulder and the way that blends from there back. I love her balance that she has underneath. This heifer is very, very nice in terms of her lower 1/3. A female that's got power to her and still has the right attachment there to her muscle pattern. Very long and feminine in that regard. It's when we set her in motion that she's got a pretty decided advantage, and one that I think is truly sound as you study her in terms of her feet and legs. I like her ability to get out and go and grab ground. She sets down on a big dense foot. I love the added cushion that she has there at her pastern, one that's very, very appropriate in the set to her hock. If we're going to change her just ever so slightly, I'd push that chest back into her body just a tiny bit and maybe just mow that tail head off just ever so slightly. But underneath it all, one that's fundamentally so good in terms of her skeleton, like that heifer an awful lot. Young man brings us a quality heifer in her own right. Neat marked heifer, got a big bullseye there on her offside. A female that honestly just kind of ran into a buzzsaw in this class because this one's got quality about her. Strong top, big backed, a female that's bold in terms of her rib shape. One that you like in terms of her balance underneath. For me, you know, one that we need to intensify in terms of her bone and her foot shape in a comparative sense. I'd like to see her grab ground with a little more authority off of her rear too, particularly this off-show side, and at the same time, we'd elevate her just a touch there out of her front end. Quality heifer to wrap up this duo. Very, very logical place to start in my mind.
The winner of Class 143 Junior Yearling Percentage Heifer goes to Exhibitor 36, Cosper Moon Pie, shown by Kylie Campbell. Second place goes to Exhibitor 35, Rock Creek Dottie, shown by Tommy McGuire. We're now ready to choose the Grand Champion Percentage Heifer. Placings in Class 8 Prospect Steers. First place, Exhibitor 70. William Thorpe from Jefferson, Iowa. Second place goes to Exhibitor 68, Vivina Sells from Omaha, Nebraska. Third place goes to Exhibitor 86, Grant Nelson, Claypool, Indiana. Fourth place goes to Exhibitor 57, Elena Lucy from Glen Easton, West Virginia. 5th place goes to exhibitor 124. Carissa Treadway from Franklin, Ohio. 6th place goes to exhibitor 34. McKenna Rankin from Tuppers Plains, Ohio. 7th place goes to exhibitor 116. Megan Mullet from Mulberry Grove, Illinois. 8th place, exhibitor 56. Katie Wolfer, Williamsburg, Ohio. 9th place goes to exhibitor 85. Haley Kuntz from Osgood, Indiana. 10th place, exhibitor 81. Austin Kaiser, St. Paris, Ohio. We're now showing Class 9. Prospect steers, Class 10 and 11, should be in the makeup ring.
As we come to conclusion here, your Crossbred Heifer show, I think two very, very high quality individuals out here, starting with this heifer here out of our first class, and one that we talked a little while ago, offered us a lot of balance, a lot of shape, very three-dimensional in terms of her kind. I like that added boldness there at her center rib. Got a little bit of extra muscle as you step in behind him. Heifer that paints us a nice picture here from this side. We talked in class, we might drag that tail head down into her hip just ever so slightly. The longer she's out here, she's perhaps just a little tentative in the way she wants to set down those rear pasterns at times. But a heifer that I do like an awful lot in terms of her extras, in terms of shape and look, and just overall body volume. Heifer here that we just talked a minute ago, one that I like so much in terms of her skeleton. Love her added cushion and her angularity as you study her off of both ends of her skeleton, quite frankly. Female that's got some rib and body and balance. She's got the appropriate look through her front 1/3. We talked just a minute ago, maybe not just perfect in the way her chest ties back into her body, maybe one that's got a little excess hair, I guess probably more than tail head hanging up there on her hip, but a very, very high quality heifer in her own right. I'll show you how I like them. I've enjoyed this division very, very much. Folks, let's give these exhibitors a nice round of applause.
Champion percentage heifer goes to exhibitor 36, Cosper Moon Pie, shown by Kylie Campbell. And reserve goes to exhibitor number 10. Cosper Artemis, shown by Paisley Garman. We're now doing showmanship on the belted Galloway side, starting out with seniors ages 17 to 21.
A very good duo of senior showmen out here. And obviously it's getting quite late in the day, and still great command and great poise out here on the front side of both of these heifer calves. You know, it's subtle differences that sort showmanship in my mind, especially when you get to these older age groups. And so for me, it's a little bit today about quickness and the command that these young ladies have on the front of the halter. Either one of them could show any day for me. They've both done an exceptional job, and they've done it throughout this whole show. Today, a young lady here to my right is going to be our champion. Young lady in the black shirt is going to be our reserve. But let's put our hands together and congratulate them on a great job well done.
This pair of black steers had to surface to the top for me. Go ahead and pull him around behind that one. They just are the most unique and have a lot of wow factor, and they're similar in terms of their frame and their growth curve. They're similar in terms of their muscularity as well when you really get on top of them and study them. Both of them are big backed and big hip. Both of them I'd like to have them move just a little wider at the ground. But of the pair, the young man steer that's going to win, to me, just balances a little better from the side profile. That's what sorts him for me. He's neater and more up-headed through his front 1/3. He's thinner in his neck for his weight. And he's longer and leveler from hooks to pins, and that's what sorts him. Young man steer in second. You know, if he could move with just a touch more base width, that would have made it really a close call for me. But this calf just gets a little plainer in his neck for a prospect steer, gets a little shorter and rounder from hooks to pins. But I think two really good calves in a close placing. The calf that goes third, to some, he may need to win, and I can understand why, because this is a really sound structured steer that's big bodied and big hipped. For me, I just wonder how much grow he's got left in him. He's the most mature about his head of these top 4 or 5, and he's the smallest framed. You set him in motion. I do love his hip and hind leg and the flexibility he has for that much muscle. If you like him moderate and built like that, I understand. But for me, he's just a little quick in his overall appearance. Young lady steer that came in fourth initially, I thought he could contend with those top 2. Man, he is awesome from the side profile. I love his silhouette. But the longer you study him of the top 4, he's easily the lightest muscled steer, and he's also the one that moves with the most concern for me when you set him in motion. He's probably the straightest in his hock of any of the top 4. So combine that with his muscle issues for me, I've got to move him down a few spots. Young man steer coming in 5th. Here's another one that's very moderate and big-bellied. He's sure got enough muscle. Unfortunately, he's too plain up through his front end, too short in his hip, maybe not quite functional enough for me in his hip and hind leg structure. The young lady steer coming next, one that initially gives you a nice side profile. When I pulled him over, the young lady had him stretched a little bit, and he looked a little too piecey for me, but he's one that gets a little straighter in his shoulder, maybe not quite as wide from behind, but at times this calf can give you an awesome look just like he is right there. Just need to tweak him structurally, widen him at his base. The short horn appearing steer that comes next in the lineup, what a great bodied calf. Tons of depth of rib in this sucker. Unfortunately, for as much mass as he has up high, when you really study him at the ground. He's one of the smaller-footed, frailer bone steers in this particular class. If we could stout him at the ground, he could move up a few spots. And then when you set him in motion, though, that's what concerns me the most is the way he waddles out of his hip. The black and white calf coming next, another moderate, big-bodied, heavy-muscled calf that just misses out in terms of structure and balance. The young lady in the cowboy hat coming, calf that's not one to act the best today, the brockle-faced steer, unfortunately just gets too hard-bodied and a little stiltier on his hind leg. And the calf that's going to round the class out, another one that's adequate in his depth of body and muscle. Unfortunately, he's just the poorest balanced, poorest structured steer in this particular lineup.
First place showmanship on his senior was Olivia Oatley. Second place was Isabella Honeycutt. Placings for Class 9 prospect steers. First place goes to exhibitor number 16, Colby Hoffman from Richwood, Ohio. Second place, exhibitor 95, Colton Holes from St. Joseph, Illinois. Third place goes to exhibitor 58, Wyatt Binkley from Newark, Ohio. Fourth place, exhibitor 48, Lily Sycophus from South Whitley, Indiana. Fifth place goes to exhibitor 117, Blake Osborne, Lynchburg, Ohio. Sixth place, exhibitor 73, Kinsey Kushauer from West Alexandria, Pennsylvania. Seventh place goes to exhibitor 99, Addison Gettinger from Connorsville, Indiana. Eighth place goes to exhibitor 65, Emily Goodwin from Wilmington, Ohio. Ninth place goes to exhibitor 87, Victoria Heiler, Bucharest, Ohio. 10th place, exhibitor 128, Lily Klebaum, Minerva, Ohio. We're now on Class 10. Class 11 should be in a makeup ring.
A very nice drive intermediates. I believe all the young ladies out here, this is deep water, folks. This is tough because it's just the smallest margin that splits them. You know, I talked a little bit in the seniors. I do think it's the little things and it's personal preference that typically sort showmanship. Each one of these young ladies out here is doing a very, very good job. And so it's just the things that catch my eye today. I like a showman that's got a lot of command and control there on the front of the halter, but then one that kind of just falls back into the woodwork and allows their calf to speak for them, has the feet placed quickly and accurately. And boy, there's several young ladies out here that do that in spades. I think there's one that kind of jumps to the top in my mind a little bit in terms of her command out here. Maybe gets a touch closer for reserve. We're going to go ahead and pick two out here today. I'll pick Grand first and then reserve. But folks, let's give a nice round of applause on just a deadly drive of showmanship.
And first place intermediate showman goes to Abby Karen, and second place goes to Olivia Graham. We're now ready for junior showmanship on the Belted Galloway side.
not a lot of numbers here as we get into our heavier weights, our next to last class, but I like this white steer to win pretty logically. He's as stout and powerful as any of them. He's as sound as any of them, yet he balances up well and is clearly the most fault-free. Just a nice calf to start off with. I think a close placing for second. The orange tinge calf is just awesome to look at from the side profile, probably as good balanced as any of them in here, and he's adequate in terms of his foot and bone. When you set him in motion, he is a little stiffer in his hock and the way he moves around the ring, and that's what makes me think about putting him third. I would like to change him there, but I think he's got enough advantages over the black steer to stay second. The black steer is a good bodied calf that probably has a slight muscle advantage over the steer in second. He just doesn't blend quite as well. The extra hair in his flanks kind of taken away from him from a balance standpoint. He's not quite as big-footed and as stout-boned as that one directly in, or the two directly in front of him, but a nice calf in his own right that ought to be a real good, practical feeder for the young man. The other white steer in the class is going to come in fourth, and this thing is good structured. This thing has some balance and eye appeal. Unfortunately, he's as frail-boned and as narrow-gauged as anything out here. Just had to move him down a few spots just because he lacks muscularity and stoutness. The Hereford Mark calf coming next. Here is one that's got some center rib to him and some shaper rib. For a Hereford influence calf, he's got a lot of meat animal shape to him as well, but unfortunately he's just one of the poorer balanced steers in this particular class. It's a little off in his hip. The black steer that's going to round the class out, really cool through his front 1/3, really tight up there through his throat latch. Unfortunately, he's just the poorest balanced and poorest structured of the 6 head in this class.
Placing class 10 of prospect steers. First place, exhibitor 125, Carissa Treadway from Franklin, Ohio. Second place, exhibitor 67, Luke Lakowski from Minerva, Ohio. Third place, exhibitor 84, Cody Landon, Fort Jennings, Ohio. Fourth place, exhibitor 60, Riley Revels from Webster, Florida. Fifth place, exhibitor 74, Hannah Heifers from Abington, Virginia. And sixth place, exhibitor number 9, Addison Wagner, Mockport, Indiana. We're now ready for Class 11 prospect steers.
Well, folks, I can think of no better way to draw to a conclusion here than to do a little junior showmanship. And, you know, as we always say when it gets down to these young ones, this is the future of your breed, and the future looks really, really bright. All of these young people out here are just doing an exceptional job. They're doing it late in the day with tired cattle, and my hat's off to each and every one of them. I've enjoyed myself immensely today. The quality from wire to wire has been very, very high. It's been fun to immerse myself in your breed just a little bit more. Once again, the quality of the exhibitors and the juniors has been second to none. It's certainly been my pleasure to get to work with your young people. But back to the business of our junior showmanship champion in reserve, I think there's one out here that's done an exceptional job, gets a little bit closer in there for reserve, and probably a couple different ways you can go. Folks, let's put our hands together, show our appreciation for our young people here as we close out the day, and I'll get you a champion in reserve.
And the winner of the junior division showmanship on the Belted Galloway side was Cora Bernard. Second place goes to Tanner Dwyer. And that concludes the Belted Galloway show for today. Thank you for everybody showing up. Appreciate it.
I think a challenging class to finish off our prospect steer show, and I think we could poll the audience and place these trio on the top end a lot of different ways. The black steer that's going to win for me, though, he wins on structural correctness. He's the one that gets around the ring with the most athletic movement. He balances as good as any of them. Yeah, I'll absolutely admit he's the lightest muscled of these top three, but to me, he's got enough dimension to him to go ahead and start with him. The gray steer that comes in second, very powerfully muscled. I love his muscle system. I love the shape down his top and out of his hip. He's one, though, that's pretty straight in the angle of his shoulder, and as he matures, I kind of worry about his knee rocking forward in him just a bit, and that's why he's going to go ahead and stay second. And compared to the steers on either side of him, I wish he had a little more bone in relation to his muscle. The black steer that comes in third's not acting good at all, but he's the one that concerns me the most from a structural standpoint. You can see as he's moving there out of his hip and hind leg, he just won't plant and go. He wants to fight that young lady, but he's impressive in terms of his foot and bone work and his rib and volume. The young man's black steer that comes in fourth, one that's really deep in the center portion of his rib. Unfortunately, he's a little straight up through his shoulder, a little up on his toe, and then a little hawked in when you move in behind him. But a good bodied, nice muscle type of a steer to be there in fifth. The white-faced steer coming next, one that's got a really level top down him. He's got some shape down that top. He's got some center rib. Unfortunately, he concerns me a lot from a structural standpoint off both ends of his skeleton. Then we get into a pair of steers that round the class off. Both of them very moderate. Both of them just a little too plain. They like that added presence we're looking for in the show ring today. But both of them ought to feed out really nice. The black and white steer coming, just love his depth of body. He ought to be a real efficient converter at the bunk. Then the red steer that rounds the class out, like his length and extension. Unfortunately, he's just the frailest and lightest muscled in the lineup.
Placings in Class 11 prospect steers. First place goes to exhibitor 106, Garrett Bile from Bloomingburg, Ohio. Second place, exhibitor 19, Marissa Sherry from Greentown, Indiana. Third place, exhibitor 89, Delaney Lucy from Glen Easton, West Virginia. Fourth place goes to 72, Brandon Compton from Holton, Indiana. Fifth place goes to exhibitor 36, Cade Newland from Long Bottom, Ohio. Sixth place goes to exhibitor 66, Ellie Monroe, Hart, Michigan. Seventh place goes to exhibitor 39, Logan Tuholsky from Trafalgar, Indiana. We now need first class winners. We're ready to choose the Grand and Reserve Champion Prospect Steer. Would the Belted Galloway Junior exhibitors all come to the backdrop for a picture, please? If you're still in the barn, all junior Belted Galloway exhibitors come to the backdrop for a picture.
Well, this has been a great show to get to judge. The quality's been tremendous. There's been some classes that have been incredibly deep, and it's going to be fun to select the Grand Reserve. I want to remind these young people, as somebody that gets the opportunity to run a show and work with exhibitors, that, you know, you're feeding these steers to an endpoint. You're feeding these steers for consumers, and we owe a duty to them to raise a product that can enter the food chain, that we do it in an efficient way, because we're under attack every day as animal agriculture for the way we raise these animals, and there's no animals that live better than show calves or show pigs or show sheep or goats, whatever it may be. But we still, no matter what we do, even though there's not much correlation anymore between the beef industry itself and the show industry, we got to remember we produce these animals to go into the food chain and feed people, because the reason we are the superpower we are as this country is because we feed our people. There's less starving people in America than any other country in the world, no matter what the media tells you. There's not many starving people in our country, and we take care of our own, and it's because of animal agriculture and because of what we do. And we need to take pride in that. We need to let our low-income neighbors know that they can afford food because of what we do. And we can't tell that message enough. And I've had the opportunity to sit through most of the shows today and hear the other gentlemen that judge talk about it being Veterans Day and talk about what it means to be a family. And I've kind of got a personal story on that. I hope my wife and kids are back home watching in Oklahoma, taking care of things. But we lost my father-in-law a couple of weeks ago, and you from Oklahoma know who he is. And after his faith and his family came a livestock show, and he lived for it. And it was the first of my wife and I to lose a parent. And until you've done that, you really don't know what that means. But I'm just telling you, the text and the messages we got and phone calls from Illinois to California to Washington, wherever it was, people across this country, you can't put into words what that means. And we come out here and we try to beat each other every single time we show. But we got to remember, we're raising kids and we're a family as a whole. And we got to take care of one another. And if you know somebody that's lost a loved one or is struggling in this industry, reach out to them. I never understood what it meant till the last couple of weeks. And so, kids, I'll leave you with that. Be sure to thank your parents. Everybody says that, and you'll understand someday when you get older what it means and the sacrifices your parents and the people around you make to be here. As we get out here to these cattle, I hope you've been able to follow me. You know, this gets challenging in places, judging prospect steers. You can't stick to one type or kind. You got to find the best ones, and I can promise you the ones that win today may not win 6 months or 3 months or a year down the road, but I try to find cattle that have some growth to them, some freshness, that have some future, but they're most importantly are right in their feet and legs and their skeleton, their balance, and then throw some muscle on top of it. I think there's one out here that came to win. He wins pretty easily in my mind. After that, I think it's going to get a little more challenging for reserve champion as we bring out that second. But this will be the last time I take the mic on the steer show. Put your hands together for these young people just doing an awesome job out here, and I'll go select you a grand.
Champion prospect steer comes out of Class 8, entry number 70, William Thorpe from Jefferson, Iowa. Reserve champion also comes out of Class 8, exhibitor number 68, Vivina Sales from Omaha, Nebraska. Congratulations. Prospect heifers, classes 1 and 2 prospect heifers should be in a makeup ring. We need entries 178 and 201. Again, classes 1 and 2 prospect heifers should be in the makeup ring.
was kind of involved before it even had a date or a name or anything else. There was a group of breeders that actually talked to the International in Chicago about moving that show here, and they didn't want to do that. So those breeders decided they would talk to Governor Ford at that time to see if he'd be willing to support a major livestock show in Kentucky, because we had the Kentucky Expo Center anyway, a great location for it. And he did agree to do that. And through a press conference in 1973, in June, he announced the formation of a major livestock show and provided funding. It didn't have a name, a date, or anything else. So myself, along with about a half a dozen other people, which included Jack Ragsdale, by the way, who is kind of our icon, as you know, we actually selected the dates and put a name on it. So I guess my first involvement obviously was right there, because I was with the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, and I was working the major the beef shows and the swine shows for the youth across the state anyway. So I kind of fit in, I guess, or at least I thought I did.
Number one is the facilities. There are no other facilities around anywhere close to these. And the people, we have great people who work the show, friendly, eager to help people out and to direct them to the right places, help them get their animals entered properly and in the right place. And once those things are done, then we put the show on, and everybody takes a big interest in it and wants to make it the best show that it could possibly be. And they will go out of their way, work long hours, way up in the night sometimes, to prepare the show, to get the show ready for the next day, and then work long hours in putting the show on. So it's a labor of love. You wouldn't do it for the money, for sure. And we have a lot of outstanding volunteers.
And I think that's the wonderful thing about livestock shows, is that particularly in the junior divisions with the young people, it teaches them, you know, if you're lucky enough to win, you know, it builds respect and in young people, that when somebody offers them something they shouldn't take, they're proud enough not to take it. But the bigger lesson is losing and being able to learn from losing. And if you bring two animals, you're going to lose when it comes to that part of it. So yeah, that's the legacy, that's the real benefit of you know, everybody today gets a trophy. Well, not if they're North American. We get them here, you're going to win, you're going to lose, and if you can't learn from losing, you're not going to progress very well, and it teaches lots and lots of lessons. And you can be really, really good and still get beat.
We're ready for Class 1 Prospect Heifers. Could we get the ring cleared out, please, for the Prospect Heifer Show?
As we kick off our heifer show here, I always prefer just judging heifers on the side profile, so we're just going to pull them in on the profile, and we may walk them a couple of times just depending on the size of the class and the differences in them. But I think there's a logical winner in this white heifer to win our first class. Biggest bellied, stoutest featured heifer that still looks like a female and has some femininity to her, really extended up through her front end. I like her in her hip and hock better than the heifer in second. We'd like to tweak her in her shoulder, and that's why the pair does get close. The red and white heifer is just gorgeous up through her front end. I love the angle to her knee and the bend she has to it. When you get her in motion, though, she gets a little straighter in her hock and doesn't want to just sit down with the flexibility of the one in front of her. You get on top of her, she may be just a little pinched in her forerib, but I think that'll be a problem that goes away in time. The orange tinged heifer that comes next, love her length and extension, just need a little more rib and volume and base width to go along with that frame. I'd like to modern her up just a bit, but she is gorgeous from the side and very acceptable in terms of her structural makeup. The solid black heifer's as good compositionally as any of them in here. She's good bellied, stout featured. Unfortunately, she concerns me the most from a structural standpoint and the way she handles her hip and hind leg. And the black and white heifer that's going to round the class out, maybe a touch more athletic than in her movement and the heifer in front of her. Unfortunately, she just gets a little piecey and is the poorest balanced heifer in this particular class.
Winner of Class 1 Prospects Heifers, exhibitor 214, Megan Keeney from Rocky Ridge, Maryland. Second place, exhibitor 178, Tucker Conrad from Spiro, Oklahoma. Third place, 167, Nick McConnell from Mount Vernon, Ohio. Fourth place, 202, Jake Magnone from Enon, Ohio. And fifth place, exhibitor 201, Rylan Alball from Waterloo, Indiana. We're ready for Class 2 Prospect Heifers. Class 3 and 4 should be in the makeup ring. And our prospect judge tonight is Tyler Norvell from Tuttle, Oklahoma.
I think a real easy place to start. Really cute kid showing a really cute heifer here. This one balances the best. This one's the best structured and as stout as any of them. I think an extremely easy place to start. Then it gets challenging for 2, 3, and 4. The heifer that's going to go second does so for me because she's the most similar to our class winner in terms of her structural correctness. She gets out and moves the second best in this particular class. She's got a lot of femininity to her, a lot of eye appeal, length, and extension. When she gets set in motion, she really comes together. Now, she doesn't have near the substance and base width of the two heifers behind her, and that's why it gets a little more challenging. No doubt the bronco-faced heifer coming next in the lineup. She does have a touch more turn to her rib, touch more depth to her rear rib and flank, even though it's hard to see because of her wide underline. But when you set this one in motion, she's just a little straighter up in her shoulder, maybe just a little more restricted in the way she moves off of her hind wheels. The black and white heifer that comes next hit me pretty hard initially because she is big-bellied, she is stout-featured, but for me, she almost looks a little too terminal in her look. She just gets a little piecey, a little too moderate in her kind for me, and then you set her in motion, maybe just gets a little hammer-legged off her hind end, but that one might be one that could raise some show steers. She does have some real extreme pieces. The solid black heifer coming next in the lineup, or I should say the white flanked heifer, nice bodied heifer that has some substance. Unfortunately, one that concerns me in being a little too straight off both ends of her skeleton. Young lady's heifer that comes next, really neat fronted, clean fronted, and up-headed heifer. Unfortunately, just a little too tight wound in her skeleton, and that causes her just to be a little more dysfunctional when you set her in motion. Then the red heifer that rounds the class out is probably more functional in her female makeup in terms of her skeleton compared to those two directly in front of her. Unfortunately, she's just the poorest balanced, frailest made heifer in this particular lineup.
And our placings for Class 2 prospect heifers. First place, exhibitor 132, Kennedy Hamilton from Hillsboro, Ohio. Second place, exhibitor 138, Aubrey May from Elizabeth, Indiana. Third place, 194, Brittany Conkey from Hicksville, Ohio. Fourth place goes to 185, Joshua Castle from Hudson, Michigan. Fifth place, 166, Nick McConnell, Mount Vernon, Ohio. Sixth place, exhibitor 151, Kirsten West from Amboy, Indiana. And seventh place, exhibitor 144, Rachel Riley from Janesville, Wisconsin. We're ready for Class 3 prospect heifers. Class 4, Class 5 prospect heifers should be in a makeup ring.
bigger class here, and I think the logical thing to do is get this pair to the top end, and then you got to use the white heifer to win. These are the two big-bodied, stout-featured heifers that have some eye appeal and balance to them, but of the pair, the white heifer just comes together better from a silhouette standpoint in terms of the way she's letting herself be presented and the way she's built in terms of her hip and hind leg and the way it lays in there. I think a real nice place to win. The short-horn appearing heifer that comes in second, like I said, she's a good-bodied, maternal-looking one. She's functional enough in her structure, but just doesn't have that added wow factor and look to her hip and hind leg compared to the one that wins. Maybe she's just not pulling herself together quite as unique as that one that wins the class. The orange heifer that comes next in the lineup is one that I'm sure hadn't been shown many times, and I think the more comfortable she comes in the ring, the better she's going to get. This one's good enough on her feet and legs for me, even though at times I'd like to tweak her in her hocks, but man, she is up-headed. I love the way her neck comes out of her shoulder. She's stout and powerful. I think with time she'll get that added rib and volume that the heifer in fourth place has, but I think a real quality female with bright days ahead of her. The black and white heifer coming next is a highly presented one that's huge-bellied and deep-sided. I love that about her. Unfortunately, she gets a little plainer about her head and neck, a little shorter in her hip, not quite as big-footed and as stout-boned as those three directly in front of her. I got to move her down a few spots because of that. The one that's an absolute freak show in terms of terminal look is the heifer in fifth. I mean, she is choke-necked and big-backed and big-topped and bold-sprung and all those things. But for a breeding female and a breeding show, she worries me just a little bit in terms of her hind leg structure, in terms of her future growth. Like I said, she's just a little too terminal in her appearance for me. The orange heifer that comes next, I like her type and kind in terms of her femininity, her length, her eye appeal, and all those things. But unfortunately, she's of the top end, the shallowest bodied and narrowest gauged heifers of those in contention. And then you set her in motion, and she's just a little straighter in her hock. And to be just a little frailer made, you need to be impeccable in your structure, and I might could move her up just a few spots. The heifer coming next in the lineup is a well-presented female that I really am accepted. I'm very accepting of her front two-thirds in terms of her rib shape and her depth of rib. Unfortunately, from her hip back, she really struggles in terms of the way she moves and balances. We need to change her structurally to move her up any higher. The solid black heifer coming next in the lineup is one that's adequate in her rib shape and her overall depth, but another victim of structural issues for me. Just like to change her in her hock all the way down to her pasture and the way she sets to the ground, lengthen her out of her hip ever so slightly. The next heifer coming in ninth, the solid black female, very moderate, very stout, very powerful, but all that works to her detriment. Don't like the way her head's shaped and the way she's put together up there. Just kind of worry about her future growth, just a little too quick in her general appearance for me. And the young man's heifer that's going to round the class out, definitely prefer her through her front one-third compared to the heifer in front of her. Unfortunately, she's just the narrowest gauged and frailest made heifer in this lineup.
Placings for Class 3 Prospect Heifers. First place, Exhibitor 205, Victoria Bonham from Hamilton, Ohio. Second place, Exhibitor 171, Isley Noy from Lafayette, Indiana. Third place, Exhibitor 218, Journey Richley from Somerset, Ohio. Fourth place, Exhibitor 147, Gwyneth Souter, Georgetown, Ohio. Fifth place, 196, Cole Harris from Hepler, Kansas. Sixth place, 161, Josie Wilt from Bloomingburg, Ohio. Seventh place, Exhibitor 184, Joshua Castell from Hudson, Michigan. Eighth place, Exhibitor 153, Colt Thomas from Meadowview of Virginia. Ninth place goes to Exhibitor 186, Joshua Castell from Hudson, Michigan. 10th place, Exhibitor 152, Colt Thomas from Meadowview, Virginia. Ready for Class 4. Class 5 and 6, Prospect Heifers should be in the makeup ring. Classes 5 and 6 should be in the makeup ring.
class took me a little longer. It's pretty challenging because there's a lot of differences. And once you kind of realize every heifer in this class needs to be tweaked structurally, then you got to kind of sort them after that. And the black heifer, to me, needs to win because she's the one that best combines stoutness and, most importantly, with balance and eye appeal. Is she perfect on her hind leg? No, but realizing you want to tweak them all, she's probably as functional as any of them. I like her to start. The orange heifer that comes in second is very highly presented and clipped well. She is very striking from the side profile. I love her muscle shape for a female as well. Now, she's not quite as stout boned as that heifer directly in front of her, and when you set her in motion, she's just a little too straight in her hot for me to move her up to that one hole. The heifer that's got a white spot on her side, on her show side here, she's as good bodied as any of them. That's what I really like about her, and that's what kept her in the hunt. Her center portion is the best of any of them out here in terms of shape, in terms of depth and dimension. Unfortunately, she too is straight in her hock, and she's one that gets a little shorter hipped and doesn't balance quite as well as those on the top end of the class. The super stout, powerful one in the lineup's the one coming fourth. You got to love her feet and her legs because she is a powerhouse. But unfortunately, all that added mass and dimension under her skeleton works to her disadvantage some and makes her a little more terminal in her look. She's the most masculine about her head. I'd change her there. You get on top of her, she's probably the weakest in her spine and has the least rib shape of any of them. But, man, she's got foot and bone. The shorthorn appearing heifer coming in the fifth hole, I love her front two-thirds. If we could just judge them off that, she's in contention. But it's her hip and hind leg, not only the way she handles it, but also the dimension to her hip that slides her down the lineup a few spots. The solid black heifer coming next, one that's very attractive up through her front end, but unfortunately she's pretty straight off both ends of her skeleton, don't want to get out and flex. The Hereford appearing heifer that comes next, what a great bodied one that's got a lot of dimension and power to her. I appreciate her moderation of frame, but unfortunately she's just one of the poorer balanced heifers in this particular lineup that's really up in her pasturing's a little stiff moving off her hind leg. The young man's heifer coming next, one that's not wanting to cooperate with him today, but one that's definitely deep-sided. I appreciate that about her, but unfortunately just not functional enough in her hip and hind leg structure, and that really takes away from her from a longevity standpoint for me and a balance standpoint. The heifer coming next in the lineup, one of the framier females out here, got a lot of hair, got a lot of attractiveness through her front end, but unfortunately just gets too narrow-gauged and uncoordinated off her hind wheels. The young lady coming next in the lineup, a real moderate, easy fleshing type of heifer that just gets really stilty off her hind leg. And the young man that's going to round the class out, this blaze-faced heifer, got some moderation to her, got some shape of rib and depth of rib. Unfortunately, she's just one of the slicker-haired, frailer-boned heifers that just loses out from a balance standpoint.
Placings for Class 4 prospect heifers. First place, entry 176, Colton Kearns from Union, Kentucky. Second place goes to exhibitor 180, Caden McGuffey from St. Paris, Ohio. Third place goes to entry 172, Caitlin Brandenburg from Bethel, Ohio. Fourth place, exhibitor 208, Cottrell Catlin from New Holland, Ohio. Fifth place, exhibitor 198, Kane Gittinger from Connorsville, Indiana. Sixth place was exhibitor 168, Eli Jarman from Felicity, Ohio. Seventh place goes to exhibitor 146, Dalton Gibson from Summitville, Indiana. Eighth place, 175, Brandon Compton from Holton, Indiana. Ninth place goes to exhibitor 200, Callista Albal from Waterloo, Indiana. 10th place goes to exhibitor 191, Lila Hauser from Georgetown, Ohio. And 11th place goes to 207, Cottrell Cade, New Holland, Ohio. We're now ready for Class 5. Class 6 and 7 should be in the makeup ring. Once again, we appreciate our judge tonight. He's Tyler Norvell from Tuttle, Oklahoma.
This is a big class and really interesting to sort because there is a lot of differences and there's a lot of things you can do. To me, the black heifer is the combination of the two behind her. She is the best balanced of the two, better balanced than the two behind her, and yet she's got an extra swoop to her belly. She's stouter than the heifer in second. She's better balanced than the heifer in third. I guess the question with her is her hock good enough? I'm going to call it good enough and go ahead and use her to win because I think if you do that, you have to use her. The black and white heifer in second, no doubt, is the soundest structured heifer in this lineup, but she's able to do that because she doesn't have near the substance and power of the two on either side of her. I'd really like to change her coming out of her shoulder over her rib, strengthen her there and make her more powerful, more robust in her rib, maybe a touch wider at her base. But in terms of structure and silhouette, that one really, really excels. The blue roan one in third has reasons to win this class. She's as big-bodied and as stout as any of them. If that's your kind, I absolutely get it. And for as stout as she is, she still has nice balance to her as well. Unfortunately for me, she is just a little quicker in her maturity pattern, and that's something I've kind of harped on all day. Then you set her in motion. She moves good enough, but if you're going to be nitpicky, I wish she had just a touch more flex as she moved off her hind wheels. But there's definite reasons for that heifer to win this class. Young lady's heifer that comes in fourth, I thought it was a close place in between 4 and 5. I think the heifer in fourth just got a little more swoop to her belly, a touch more rear rib and flank to her, maybe just a little more presence. Now, this one too, she's more similar to our class winner than the ones in between her in second and third, but unfortunately, she doesn't handle her hind leg as well as our class winner, and that's why she goes down. She just hinges a little bit out of that hock as you see her leaving there, just has a little too much set from the side. Same thing can be said about the young man's heifer in fifth. Need a changer in her hock and her also down in her pasturing, but that one gives you a nice look when the young man gets her set up, and she's really bold sprung as well. The bronco-faced heifer that comes next, I placed her in sixth on the move. She's as good-bodied and as parallel in her lines as any of them in this lineup. Unfortunately, that top 6, she is the smallest footed. She is the frailest boned, and for me, when you're a little smaller footed and frailer boned, there's no room for error when it comes to your structural correctness, and she just doesn't excel there enough for me to move her any higher. The solid black heifer coming out, love her rib and volume. Man, she excels in that. That one can give you a nice look. Unfortunately, she has the bad combination of being a little plainer fronted, a little frailer boned, and that really takes away from her from a balance standpoint. You know, as we move on down the line up through this set of cattle, it really impressed me from top to bottom how good the livestock were. There's not a bad animal out here. That's the biggest class of the day, probably has the most depth in terms of just quality from top to bottom, and that's impressed me. A lot of cattle. The young lady coming out there in ninth, or 10th, excuse me. That one's just a little too terminal in her look. Young man that's going to round the class out, same thing. Just gets a little rounder in her rump, a little too terminal in her look, but do appreciate that foot and bone underneath her.
Placings for Class 5. First place goes to Exhibitor 133, Tate Bruns from Bellflower, Missouri. Second place goes to exhibitor 209, Cottrell Casey, New Holland, Ohio. Third place goes to exhibitor 150, Haley Miracle, Yale, Michigan. Fourth place goes to exhibitor 139, Christina Winter from Asheville, Ohio. Fifth place, exhibitor 206, Garrett Hansel, Forest, Ohio. Sixth place, 157, Jordan Phillips, Denfield, Ohio. Denfield, Ontario, I think. Seventh place, 135, Kylie Shanky, Waynetown, Indiana. Eighth place, 149, Kinley Klein, Ripley, Ohio. Ninth place, exhibitor 143, Blake Herdman from Hillsborough, Ohio. 10th place, exhibitor 197, Kinsley Harris, Hepler, Kansas. 11th place, exhibitor 154, Peyton Chant from DeWitt, Michigan. 12th place, exhibitor 169, Tanner Perrin from Felicity, Ohio. 13th place, exhibitor 199, Luke McNone from Enon, Ohio. We're now ready for Class 6.
Another challenging class, but the black heifer rises to the top for me because she's just the soundest structured heifer in the lineup. The more you study them, she's the most functional in her hip and hind leg structure. She reaches the best out of her front end. You know, would you like to give her a little more depth of heel? Absolutely. But this one's just gorgeous from the side profiles, got that extra swoop to her belly. By far the most flexible and correct in her hip and hind leg structure. Be the first to admit she's one of the lighter boned heifers in this lineup. But for a female, she's got enough bone for me, and I think she needs to start. There was no doubt I knew the white heifer needed to beat the black heifer. It's just where do you put the one that ends up winning the class. But this white heifer is impressive on the standstill. Huge-footed and stout bone, yet it's good-bellied and has some femininity up through her front end. When you set her in motion, though, she's just not quite good enough on that hind leg. She wants to get a little choppy for me. For a breeding female, we just need a little more flexibility, needs to meet her stride a little more correctly. The black heifer, the exact same thing can be said about her in terms of her hip and hind leg and her hock and the way it needs to be handled better. But then you go on the top side of her skeleton, I'd like to change her in her pins, just lift her in her pins ever so slightly and help her balance up. But with all that said, that's another awesome necked heifer that's stout-featured, stout bone, and good-bellied. The young lady's heifer coming in next, I thought she could contend on the standstill because she's got a similar silhouette than two heifers in front of her, maybe not quite as stout bone, but then you set her in motion, and of the top four, she concerns me the most in the way she moves off of her hind end. The roan heifer coming next, a big frame, burly, stout one that's not acting well at all. She's got some real neat pieces about her, but she just concerned me too when you set her in motion, how straight she can get in her hock, and I just didn't think she blended as well from front to rear as those four in front of her, probably because she's a touch shorter hipped for as long spined as she is. The heifer coming in sixth is one that's, you've seen me kind of place him down all day. She's super cool for what she is in terms of power and bone and dimension. Unfortunately, she's just too terminal in her look. She might be, I don't know if they have a market heifer show here or not, but definitely could be competitive in that because her feet and legs are pretty good for as powerful as she is. She's just a little too quick in her overall appearance for me. The heifer that comes next, the gray heifer, a lot of length and extension, probably a nickel more functionality in her structure compared to the three behind her, but unfortunately just gets a little harder bellied and just doesn't have that added breeding female look that those heifers on the top end of the class have. Another stout, powerful one coming next, the white underlined heifer. I'd like to change her about her head and give her more quality there, lengthen her out of her hip. The black heifer coming next, a lot of length and extension to this one, just need more rib and volume to go along with the length. Then the young man's heifer that's going to round the class out, a bold-sprung female. We just need more femininity and more structural correctness to go along with that added depth of rib and shape of rib.
Placings for Class 6. First place, exhibitor 250, Kayla Lippert from Sinclairville, New York. Second place, exhibitor 158, Jayla Reiser, Lucasville, Ohio. Third place, exhibitor 162, Anna Kelly from Kokomo, Indiana. Fourth place, exhibitor 145, Gentry Krotzer from Kansas, Ohio. Fifth place goes to exhibitor 203, Lillian Johnson, Bryant, Indiana. Sixth place, exhibitor 148, Claire Riebling from Elkton, Michigan. Seventh place, exhibitor 155, Harper Buckley from Shirley, Indiana. Eighth place, exhibitor 215, Justin Schonkweiler from Columbus, Ohio. Ninth place, exhibitor 164, Chase McAllister, Bethel, Ohio. 10th place, exhibitor 130, Grant Robertson, Peebles, Ohio. We're ready for Class 7. Class winners, first and second place class winners should be in the makeup ring. We will choose our grand champion prospect heifer after this class. We want to thank our judge, Tyler Norvell, for sorting out a very high quality set of cattle tonight. Want to thank everybody for attending the North American. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary. We will continue tomorrow with more junior heifer shows. We will have shows in Broadband and Freedom Hall. And approximately at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, we will have our steer show. I also want to thank the great group of volunteers that help put this show on and keep these cattle moving. Without them, it would be very difficult to put a show of this size on. They volunteer many hours, and they've put in a long day today, and we'll put another long day in tomorrow.
Well, the last class of the heifer show has definitely been our best and deepest class of the heifer show. These are fun to sort. There's 3 really good structured, good-bodied future brood cows in this lineup. And young lady, if you want to go ahead and pull that heifer around in third out here too, you deserve to be talked in this top trio, because I think they're an outstanding set of heifers that are really close, and there's differences in them. And I know the heifer that wins to me is the most striking from the side profile. She's the most unique up through her head and her neck. She's the tightest in her throat latch. And then she's the strongest down her spine. She's the longest out of her hip. You set her in motion, it's perfection when she moves. You get on top of her. Is she the stoutest featured, biggest backed one? She is not. But she has more than enough dimension and power for me. I love the base width she moves away with. I like that heifer to win. No doubt the heifer in second, and it's really subtle differences that sort these, as another one that's nice from the side profile. I hate that I'm having to be critical of this heifer's head and neck and say it's not as unique as the one in front of her, but it's not. But that one, she's still more than acceptable enough there. Compared to the heifer that wins, she's not quite as long-hipped either. Now, she does have advantage in being just a touch stouter, but in a heifer show, I like the added uniqueness of her front end and the length of hip in the class winner, but that's a close placing for me. The heifer in third, she contends with him. Great-bodied female. Love her depth of rib. When you get on top of her, though, she gets a little weak there behind her shoulder. She gets a little piecey in terms of balance. Not quite as tight-heighted up there through her neck. Not quite as unique up through her neck. But another really good structured one. If she blended just a bit better and stayed together in her top line a touch better, she could contend to win this class as well. Really great job to each of those 3 young ladies on the top end of the class. When this heifer in fourth came in the ring early, I thought, well, this one could definitely win the class. She's one of the better heifers we've seen. And then those other 3 walked in. Of the top 3, or top 4, excuse me, she does not flex and move quite as well as those top 3, and that's being ultra critical. She just doesn't flex in that hawk quite as well. She gives up a little bit of dimension too. She's clearly lighter weight than those 3 in front of her, but that's an awful good heifer to be standing in fourth. Then we get into the heifers that have probably a little more structural issues, and that's why they had to go down. This one's very unique from the side profile of the heifer in fifth. Very chiseled out through her front end, very level topped and level hipped, really stout featured, but that puts a little extra stress on her skeleton. She doesn't get out and move quite as athletic as those on the top end. The young lady's heifer coming next. It's probably a little more maternal in her look than that one in fifth. I like her rib cage and her depth of flank a little better, but you set her in motion. Then another one that's just a little straighter in her hock, a little stiffer moving, and we need to change her there to move her up any higher. A real stout, powerful one with huge feet coming in seventh. She's really level down her top, but then she wants to get a little high on her tail head. Doesn't have quite the depth of rib of the heifers on either side of her. The young man in the cowboy hat coming out next is one that's really broody looking in terms of her depth of rib and her fleshing ability, but she's one that's just a touch shorter coupled, then gets a little shorter hipped, and that keeps her from really being able to get out and go. The bald-faced heifer coming next, that's an awful good one to be standing eighth or ninth further down the lineup. Really functional in her makeup, make that young lady a nice cow. She just gets too plain up through her front end, hinges on her hock just a little too much for me. And the pair of heifers that round the class out, as good of a pair as we've had standing on the bottom end of the class, they just ran into a real buzzsaw today. The black heifer, just a little more restricted in her movement, a little more terminal in her look, and the blue roan heifer, I like her front 1/3. I like her femininity about her head. Unfortunately, just one of the narrower gauge, poorer balanced heifers in this lineup. Give those young people a round of applause for a real outstanding class to conclude the night.
Our placings for Class 7. First place, entry 159, Vivian Sikafus from South Whitley, Indiana. Second place goes to entry 190, Sydney Nelson, Claypool, Indiana. Third place, entry 183, Macy Stanley from Chillicothe, Ohio. Fourth place, entry 165, Aaron Cavanaugh from Riley, Michigan. Fifth place, entry 173, Abigail Hauser, Dunlap, Tennessee. Sixth place, entry 217, Journey Reichley, Somerset, Ohio. Seventh place is entry 181, Parker Dean, Martinsville, Ohio. Eighth place, 211, Colin Federke, Napoleon, Ohio. Ninth place, exhibitor 210, Michaela McDonald from Perry, Georgia. 10th place, Entry 170, Lily Decker, St. John's, Michigan. And 11th place, exhibitor 204, Eliza Smith from Bethel, Ohio. We're ready to choose the Grand and Reserve Champion Prospect Heifer.
Well, it's been a long day, and especially for the volunteers that have been out here working and for the families that put this together, and I'm sure a lot of you have long days tomorrow as well. So I think I made up my mind I'm not going to take a lot of time here, but I do want to follow up on something Jay said announcing, is that no stock show happens without volunteers, and I've learned that when I took over OYE and Cattlemen's Congress. You like sponsors, but you have to have volunteers, and it's a thankless job they do. They're out here 12 to 14 hours helping these kids and helping breeders, and don't get a lot of appreciation for it. So I ask you to put your hands together for these people that have worked the ring today to make this show possible. I wish you all the best of luck for the remainder of this show. And as we get out here, I think there's a pair of them that kind of go together and need to win. There's been a lot of good classes, some challenging classes in this heifer show, but I think there's a pair of them out here that are really maternal in their look, they're right in their structure, and then they got that added balance and eye appeal you want and the structural correctness to go out and be cows for a long time and make these young people a lot of money. Go put your hands together for these young people, and I'll show you the one I like the best.
Champion Prospect Heifer goes to entry 159, Vivian Sycophus from South Whitley, Indiana. Congratulations. And reserve champion Prospect Heifer goes to entry 190, Sydney Nelson from Claypool, Indiana. Congratulations, everybody. Everybody have a safe drive home. Have a good evening.